So now we come to the fourth great feast of the Christmas season. On Christmas, I mentioned, and I forget which Mass I had, but if we think of the Christmas season as focusing on the mystery of the Incarnation, one of the two great mysteries of the Christian faith, focusing on the mystery of the Incarnation, there is no way that the full meaning and dimensions of that mystery can ever be exhausted. If we think of the mystery of the Incarnation of the Son of God as a beautiful jewel, each of the feasts of Christmas turn the jewel into a different light. We see a different dimension of its beauty. The first great feast, of course, is Christmas. Christmas began in the 3rd century, the early 200s, in the city of Rome. And it was initially a pagan feast where they exchanged gifts and welcomed in the renewal of the sun, the renewal of light in the world. And the Christians decided they were going to change the meaning of that feast and not speak of the sun up in the sky, but rather of the Son of God coming to earth. The second great feast, the Feast of the Holy Family, which we celebrated last Sunday. Feast of the Holy Family reminds us that Jesus grew in his humanity the way most of us grow in our humanity, through family life. That he was taught to love God as a human being. He was taught to pray. He was taught to know good from evil. He was taught to be compassionate and kind and thoughtful of others through the example of his mother and his foster father. The third great feast focuses on the mother, the one who made it all possible through her assent to the message of the angel. And so we celebrate the greatest of the Marian feasts by the very definition of it. Mary, the Mother of God. Her motherhood of God is the source of all her blessings, of all her graces, of all her prerogatives, because God the Father chose her to be the mother of his Son. That there is no human being that has ever lived or ever will live that has a more intimate relationship with all three persons of the Trinity. With God the Father, who chose her to be the mother of his Son, certainly with God the Son, whose mother she was when he became human, and with the Holy Spirit, who overshadowed and impregnated her. There is no person who has a more intimate relationship with Jesus Christ than Mary has. Today we celebrate the fourth of the great feasts, the Feast of the Epiphany. The Epiphany is the second most ancient feast in the church. It predates Christmas by at least 100 years and was first celebrated by the church in Egypt, in Alexandria. And again, was the baptism, if you wish, of a pagan feast. Each year, the people of Egypt watch the Nile River dying, having less and less and less water in it. And finally, around the 6th of January, early January, the melting snows in Central America replenished the waters of the Nile, and it began to fill up again. And so the pagan Egyptians saw this as the manifestation of the divinity of the Nile River. Well, the Christians were not going to buy that. So they took the feast and transposed the meaning, the manifestation of God's divinity in the person of Jesus Christ. What is the relationship between the Epiphany and Christmas? Well, for at least half the Christian world, especially the Orthodox churches, the Epiphany is the greater feast. Christmas emphasizes the humanity, the birth of Jesus Christ as a man, as a baby. The Epiphany looks at it from the other side and sees the manifestation of God in the baby of Bethlehem. That is the fullness of God's presence in the tiny baby of Bethlehem. And so the feasts are complementary. They perfect one another. They bring out the two dimensions of the two mysteries of Christ's nature, the two natures of Christ. His human nature, his divine nature. The human emphasized in the celebration of Christmas, the divine emphasized in this celebration. So that's one aspect of the greatness of this feast. Secondly, we look at the Magi. Who exactly were the Magi? For centuries, Christians thought the Magi were three kings, and so we have even today reference to the three kings. But that was a mistaken understanding of the word Magi. Magi did not mean king. It meant a scholar, a court official, a counselor, an advisor. And so who were the Magi? We don't really know who they were. But we do know one important thing about them. Don't you want to know what that is? You do? Good. We know one important thing about them. They were not Jewish. They were not members of the chosen people. They were whom the Jews would have regarded as Gentiles, as pagans, whom the Jews would have looked down on. And so the great mystery here is, why is it that there were only two kinds of people that God intervened to announce the birth of his son? One by the use of the angels in Bethlehem to the shepherds who were Jews, and the other by means of the star to the Magi who were not Jews. And that's the first indication of God's will, that all people are his children. And for us, the practical implication is that any form of prejudice, of discrimination, of hatred of anybody because of their nationality, their language, their race, their customs, their religion, all of this is abhorrent to God. All are his children. That's the great lesson for us. And so we look at the Magi who were searching, who were journeying to find Christ. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But there's another person who figures into this that brings out another dimension of this great feast. And that is the person of Herod. Herod of the small mind, the modern man, the one who thought only of himself, the one who was ruthless, who would do anything to secure his power and his glory, the one responsible for the death probably of thousands upon thousands of people. None of his great building projects, including the temple, the third temple, the temple that Jesus knew, none of the building projects were built without a heavy cost of life. Herod could care less as long as his glory was manifested. And so when he hears the prophecy of the newborn king, he sees a rival. He doesn't see God's will. He doesn't care about God's will. He doesn't even care about the prophecies, as long as they can tell him where to find this upstart. And then he maliciously lies to the three Magi, lies to them and says, go find this child and bring me back news that I too may come and worship him. He had no intention of worshiping him. He wanted to kill him. So you have the character of Herod, totally selfish, totally uncaring about God or the things of God or the will of God. Contrasted with the Magi who were seeking to know more about God, who wanted to come to know the Messiah. And finally, we look at the journey that the Magi took. St. Luke, or St. Matthew, when he tells us of the Magi, certainly intended it as a historical event. There really were three Magi, and they really did seek out the Christ child. But it also has a symbolic meaning, and one that especially touches you and me, because the journey of the Magi is really a sign of our life's journey to Christ. That we have been given the gift of faith, that star. And sometimes that star of faith shines very brightly in our lives. Other times we can't see it. It disappears, as it disappeared for the Magi. There are times when it is easy to be on the journey of faith. There's a lot of other times when it's very hard, when it's very difficult, when it's very challenging. The other night in Holbrook, I had dinner with a 23-year-old young man, and in the middle of a very nice Chinese dinner, he said, "Father, can I ask you a personal question?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "I've always liked coming to Mass. I've always enjoyed it. But now I'm finding it to be something of a chore. I don't get the same thing out of it." He says, "Am I losing my faith?" And I said, "No, not really." I said, "We've all had that experience." I said, "There are several things to be aware of. Coming to Mass is not a matter of feeling. No? I've had people over the years tell me, "Well, Father, I don't come to Mass if I don't feel like it, because then I'd just be being a hypocrite." And my reply to that is, do you accord the same right to the priest? That if I don't feel like celebrating Mass, I don't have to be here? I'll just put a sign on the door of the church, "No Mass this morning because I don't feel like celebrating"? No. Coming to Mass, giving our worship to God, giving our thanks to God, is not a matter of how we feel. There are many times when I don't particularly feel like being here, especially if I'm assigned the early Mass. I may not feel like getting out of bed. But it goes beyond that. It's far deeper than how I feel. Sort of like a parent saying to their young children, "I'm not going to feed you today because I don't feel like cooking." What's that all about? No. There are some things that are so important they go beyond our feelings. They go deeper than our feelings. And so the journey of the Magi is really a little picture, a capsulization of the journey of our faith life. We're always going to encounter the Herods of this world, the ones who will put us down, the ones who will try to use us, the ones who will try to manipulate us, the ones who will lie to us. We're always going to encounter the Herods. But through it all, we persist because we're guided by that star, that we too may come to worship Christ, that we too may come to offer our gifts, not gold, frankincense, and myrrh. You understand the significance of those gifts, don't you? I pause for a reply. Do you understand the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh? Gold, you do? Good. I could ask some of you what they are. No. Gold because Christ is king, frankincense because he is God, and myrrh because of his burial. Myrrh was a spice used to anoint people, anoint the body before burial. And so these three gifts were very, very symbolic. The gifts we offer, part of it is our treasure for the support of the church. Part of it is our worship of God, our fidelity in living out our faith. And part of it is eternally being thankful for the sacrifice Christ made for our salvation. Got it? Good.